East and West learning connections.
Helps people of different cultures break barriers and connect with each other.
Yeah, so for this session, so let's have a little bit sharing and the discussion based on your experiences and your knowledge of Canadian rights and freedoms. So I'm gonna ask the questions, and Terry's here, so Terry can contribute into the discussion as well. And if you have any extra questions, feel free to do so. The purpose of this session is to give us a chance to share our experiences and knowledges so that we can support each other. I think that was the discussion Young had with me. So we can go about in this way. Okay, so the first question I want to ask everybody here is which of the Canadian rights and freedoms affect your daily lives? So if yes, please give 1 or 2 examples. Yeah, so I mean they all affect us one way or another. But what I'm trying to ask here is which one comes to you very obviously, yeah, or maybe some of them came to you to and you have to wrestle with them, that kind of thing. Yeah. So anybody does anybody have a story or two to share with the group? Or if you have question, you can also ask that as well. Yeah, so if you need to go back to the slides, I can go back as well. So I'll go to the overview. So then you will be able to, yeah. So this is the overview of Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Do they know what that one means? Mobility rights?
Yeah, so
What
we can.
do they think it means?
Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Terry actually has a question. Does everybody understand what a mobility means?
Canadian mobility rights. That's not so everyone can drive a car, right? Or everybody.
You can move, right? You can migrate from one province to another.
Right.
Or you can go outside of the country and come back.
Right.
And
Suppose you're a doctor, a nurse, or somebody in the medical profession, and you move to British Columbia, and you can immediately start practice. Is that correct?
no, I
Oh,
think because like that's not mobility rights. It's your profession. You have to be recognized or certified in the province that you or licensed in the province you're gonna work for. Right?
The reason I asked the question is because the rights are not absolute within the country. In other words, one of the things that Stephen reviewed with you about the way the charter is set up, it doesn't say your rights are absolutely the same everywhere in the country. It has a clause to that part of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that says that what you're claiming as your right has to be something that can be agreed to, taking into consideration the laws of the province. And in this instance, under the Constitution, health is a provincial matter. So therefore, the legal bodies governing medicine, the doctors, the nurses, etc., have the right, because it's a provincial matter, to say that if someone's going to practice here, they have to be registered here. Something similar, and in this province, something similar would be the case for law. You might, if you were a lawyer here and you went out to be a lawyer in British Columbia, you might have to be called to the bar there, or you might have to do some other thing. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer and haven't been to British Columbia as a lawyer, but there would be things that you would have to do. So that the Constitution is always reasonable, I emphasize the word, in terms of rights. And people who think that we should have absolute rights everywhere in the country are mistaken concerning the principle or one of the major principles on which the Constitution is based. Reason, common sense, reason in that sense, something that all people can understand who are mentally competent to do so, will always be brought to bear only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. Now, that actually gives you an opening because you can challenge it on that basis. And you quite often hear about people who've come from another country who are perhaps very advanced in the medical profession who can't seem to get their registration here. Can you challenge it? Well, of course you can, because prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. You can argue that that's not justifiable if you are a brilliant surgeon in your own country, and Canada recognizes the level of surgery as being very high in that country. Why can't you get registered here? Well, you hear people saying that, and in fact, people going to law about that. So there's a way of using the rights and freedoms, even when they appear to be somewhat restrictive. It's still based upon demonstrable justification in a free and democratic society. Can still be appealed and all sorts of things like that. So I think that's an important point there.
Hi, Terry.
Hi.
Hi, I have a question. So this concept of equality, regardless of race, country of origin, what is the major drive behind that concept that be brought into our constitution in act? Because we came from a quite racist society. So what do you think is the major drive behind that in this like it evolves, right?
Right. Well,
Yeah.
if you don't mind, I'll go into my area of specialty in political thought, which is theory and philosophy. And in political theory, if you're trying to understand what's behind, that's what I mean by theory, a system of thought about a society. In political theory, if you want to get to the level of principles, which is what you're asking me, you have to have a theory of history. In other words, you have to see how something has come to occur in the first place, and you have to be able to explain how that could be the case. The other thing you have to have is a theory of human nature. So when I studied political theory, both at McMaster University and in Oxford, I had to study theories of history and theories of human nature in order to see why different political systems developed differently. And I've been emphasizing to you in this series, since we've been doing it, the evolutionary nature of Canadian political theory and the revolutionary nature of that of the United States. Now, this is not because I've got something against the United States. It's just a different basis, a different understanding of history. And Canadian political theory developed out of a colonial system which had itself developed out of events in northwestern Europe. In other words, these were colonies of northwestern European maritime powers, specifically Britain and France. Whereas the American revolutionary system developed more out of settlements by people who had something against what they were coming from in northwestern Europe in terms of the way society was run. So the Canadian political system is evolutionary, and although had little burps, as it were, of revolution, really just rebellions, was in such a situation that it could develop over a significant length of time changes in society that represented advances, genuine advances in human rights, in a way without revolutions, whereas in the United States, it was part of a revolutionary society, as France was, for example. Britain also had a revolution, but it absorbed it in the 17th century. It didn't actually change the society completely. It didn't collapse, as it were. So the thing is that the answer to your question really has something to do with. It, can I continue?
Sorry, I think maybe my phone is talking
Oh,
when a message was sent to the chat room. Sorry.
you okay?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so just to finish the point, and this is the point that I think my answer to your question with that background is that clearly the modern world brings much greater freedom to individuals than the medieval world did, for example, or the classical world. There's no doubt about that. But it was this move towards freedom and individual rights was absorbed in the Canadian system, as in, for example, Britain and actually in the Scandinavian countries, interestingly, as well, in a way that didn't involve violent revolutions. Consequently, and this obviously is my opinion, my belief, okay, I think Canada can handle challenges such as the one that Stephen mentioned to you as an example that's currently occurring concerning the bill that's been brought forward to extend what should we say, extend uh, criticism of language that's used, either written or spoken, to other groups that now have come forward in society with rights that perhaps 50 years ago weren't an issue. And it's my view that that can be handled through the sort of system that we have in a way that doesn't lead to the split in society that you see, for example, in the United States around these issues. They call it the cultural wars. I think we can get through the cultural wars uh, using critical common sense so that the freedoms of religion, etc., are retained at the same time as people who want greater freedom to be as they are allowed to have that because it doesn't require overthrowing the whole system, if you see what I mean. So I don't know if this addresses your question, but the hate speech issue at the moment, the first thing that I thought of when someone mentioned hate speech years ago is George Orwell's 1984, in which, as you probably know, and he's criticizing Stalinist Russia at the time, particular. He's actually criticizing Britain as well, because things were moving in that direction when he wrote the book in 1949, 1948, actually, which was to be the original name of the book, not 1984, 1948. It was moving in the direction of suppressing speech and suppressing thought. And in his novel, there's something called thought crime, because with the technology that had been developed in this imaginary society, your thought could be monitored as well as what you said. And I thought, hate speech? That sounds crazy. But now I understand how, particularly currently in the debate about anti-Semitism, etc., and all of this sort of thing, that does come to be a helpful concept in order to strengthen the laws against inciting violence without suppressing freedom of speech in the Canadian context. But I think it will be much more difficult in a different context where people are thinking in revolutionary terms and you have to destroy the opposition rather than convert the opposition to a more moderate position. Now, I'm not sure if that helps or not, but I think this is the sort of issue that you're driving at, Lincoln, perhaps.
So basically, it's out of people's consciousness, like a human nature. And because we have a quite tolerant attitude or in the system, then it evolves naturally from a racist society to a more equal society.
Well, it can do for historical reasons. And I'm emphasizing this because this whole point about understanding the way something has developed is very helpful in actually being generous towards those who haven't developed it. Okay. I think Northwest Europeans were extremely fortunate because the whole overseas episodes coming from Northwestern Europe were begun because none of the peoples there were sea peoples, were begun by the Vikings. And if you remember, the Vikings, Viking basically means gangster, okay? These were just people who tore everything up and destroyed everything but they became civilized. And out of that civilization of a barbarian people, you got over a very long period of time a good civilization. It's always been in danger of cracking up, but I think people have noticed just in time that it doesn't do that and come back to a much more moderate understanding of how to run a society. And the Scandinavian societies, a couple of which are constitutional monarchies, are in fact very moderate societies, and people seem to get along very well there. So, and these were barbarians not that long ago in history.
Yeah, good question. Thank you, Terry.
You're welcome.
Yeah, any more questions or comments on this topic?
Then I have another question. So we're talking about this new act in discussion about hatred, but I do not really have a lot of knowledge about it. But I have a general question. So especially for immigrants, we came here. We think it's a free country. So sometimes you have your opinion, uh, say regarding an issue like a society in a society. It could be related to religion. It could be related to the country of origin. Um, so what is the line between like you have your freedom to express your opinion, you have the freedom to give criticism, right? And you need to respect like all this uh, people's constitutional right and do not go against the constitution, um, do not fall into this hatred, speech.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so yeah, so are you giving a comment or are you asking a question?
I'm just asking question like how do you balance, or what's the fine line there?
Well, I'm going to have to give you a bit more political theory. I'm sorry.
Yes,
To,
please.
to answer your question, okay, in the school of thought that I belong to in political theory, in other words, what I've been taught in my training and I've tried to use in my life, is that the ideological systems that were put in place in the 18th century, the 1700s, and you think of events like the French Revolution, the American Revolution, which was less violent, of course, it was earlier than the French, later the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, the German Revolution, which was the Nazi Revolution when they finally got a revolution. Those revolutionary ideologies are running to their end because they're dead ends. Now, I'm not going to give you all the reasons why I believe that because we'd have to be there for a while, or I could refer books to you or something. But the point is, they're running to their end. Now, people have understood this. People in the know have understood this for a long time. So the question is, how do you get the good out of those things? Because this was always the question in political history in all cultures. How do you get the good out of something which is coming apart? without giving in to the disastrous results if you don't succeed in convincing enough people to get the good out of it. That's really what you've got to try to do. So you could think of current situations, obvious situations like Israel and the Palestinians, or the United States and Iran, or whatever it is, and you can see where cool heads following wise principles can find their way through these things without catastrophes. But hotheads following distorted views of reality are not going to find their way through these things. And again, this is not to blame any particular group of people, because all people seem to suffer from these problems historically. And where people have thought about these things in the Western tradition, as you know, it was the Greeks who thought about this most deeply, but this didn't stop them from having a number of catastrophes, including Alexander the Great's conquest, and some of that stuff was just terrible. So it doesn't stop people. Wisdom doesn't stop people from doing crazy things, but it still helps people when there is a tradition of wisdom in the society that you can draw on. And I think that's the case. One of the things I studied at university was Chinese history and politics. I think that's the case in China. So that a civilization with a long history, lots of thought about this, and a revolutionary movement which has learned from its mistakes to some extent, one hopes. We won't mention names, but I think you can think about what they might be, has prospects of finding their way through these difficulties. And what one should do in the sort of area that we're talking about, is discuss things in terms of right reason, common sense, whatever we're going to call it, perhaps the Tao in Chinese tradition or something like that, where you've got some sort of basis for making a common agreement so that there is a maximum of freedom with a minimum of conflict, a maximum of good, because that's one of the big questions in political science. What is the good? And then the only other big question is, what is to be done? How are we going to get that? So in order to do that, you have to dig pretty deeply. And that's why I think that this sort of course is helpful for citizens, because they can see what, quote, Canadian values are when you get politicians talking about Canadian values all the time, and they could mean any number of things. Values, the way problems, look at the way some problems, I don't need to mention the problems, but I'm sure you can think of them, and learn from that. So this is basically what I'm saying to you about freedom of speech. It is a free country, but people who say we live in a free country, there's no such thing as an absolute free country. You'd have to have to be a country of angels or something, where everything's perfect. So the thing is that a great deal of wisdom is required, and on the part of electors as well. So if you give a simple example like people crossing the floor, well, you might say, well, you might be cynical about that and say, oh, well, they just want to get on. They were elected to something else. No, maybe they view themselves as trustees rather than just representatives. Maybe they think it's better for their. In other words, if we think the best of why they might have done that, then it's probably better to do that if we want to preserve a good discourse in the political life of our country. Think the best. Don't close your eyes to the worst, but think the best, and then try to see whether that can be promoted. And I think if that sort of policy rules in a society, and it doesn't matter which society it is, the same basic principle would apply in other situations, then there can be good results. And things like prejudice can be overcome.
Thank you. And I saw Ian raised his hand. Ian?
Yeah, hi guys.
Hi.
I just want to thanks Terry for that. It's I think one of the things about any political system is that where you have more than one person, rights will invariably clash. Like if you're alone on the planet, you can do anything you want. As soon as there's a second person in the room, you need to curb your behavior because your free behavior could harm that other individual.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key principle in most political systems. Most legal systems are set up to minimize the potential harms that my free exercise of my rights could have on you. To answer Yang's specific question about where is the line between your right to freedom of speech and that tipping over into a hate crime, the legislation is very specific. It has to be the kind of language or communication that incites violence against a particular person or group because of a particular trait.
Yes.
So you can hold differing opinions and you can express those opinions freely, but as soon as you start saying, I think all people of X type should die, then you've crossed over into hate speech because
Yeah,
you're
that is very much understandable.
you're inciting violence against that group, right?
Mhm. Yeah, so I think Stephen talked about a bill that is in discussion right now at the Senate about this hatred, like the act about hatred, right? And he said some people, like the conservatives, they're saying these will infringe people's, free expression of their opinion if they criticize some, say some religion or some things happened in this, community, they could be labeled as, go against the law. Yeah. So I think for especially for immigrants, it might be good to know, uh, this how to tell this fine line.
I don't have a lot of background knowledge here, but I do know that a lot of the discussion around free expression of extreme political views, especially in the context of Israel versus Palestine, those seem to be the kinds of demonstrations that are most worrying in terms of their potential to incite violence. There have been a number of violent clashes between protest groups. There have also been violent attacks on various communities perpetrated by one group or the other. So there's been Islamophobic violence. There's also been anti-Jewish violence. These are not isolated. There are broader issues involved. I mean, there are protests that have turned violence against the Sikh community. There have been violent attacks on, African American people. So it's not only that conversation, but that conversation is particularly volatile right now. And I think what the legislators are trying to do, and Terry, you can jump in here and help me out, but I think what the legislators are trying to do is they're trying to figure out how to allow people free expression of their political views without the detrimental effects that these protest clashes are having on people and their security. So it's not that there are protests going on. It's that when these protests clash, there's a potential for it to erupt into violence. So it's a very difficult line to find from a lawmaking perspective, because as Terry says, you want to maximize people's ability to express themselves freely and to think freely. But you also want to curb the kind of communication that leads directly to violence, political or otherwise.
Mhm.
Right? Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah.
I think the bill at the moment, if I'm correct, has been passed by the Commons and is in the Senate. Now that means that the bill, BC9, has gone through the committee stage, and I think we all know at this point what that means. It's been discussed by committees which are made in the Commons, which are made up of members from all of the parties on the that are on the committee from all of the parties in a way that reflects the number of seats that the party has in the House. In other words, roughly when it went through the committees, it was split in terms of the committee members between liberals and conservatives, and perhaps one or two New Democrats. I'm not sure. So it's gone through that process, and it's now gone to the Senate. Now, the Senate's supposed to be a place of sober second thoughts, and one hopes it will be, because these are appointees rather than elected, and they're supposed to be above the political fray. And then, of course, the bill would have to be signed by the Governor General to become law. Now, this is where I think the system is good, because you can see it's a fused system as opposed to a separate system. All of these things are quite closely connected in the parliamentary system, so that the people would be not in different worlds, as it were. They're in the same basic world on the Hill in Ottawa. And I think that's a good thing, rather than having the separation of powers. And of course, some people might disagree with that, but I think the fusion of powers is good, as opposed to confusion, of course, but the fusion, they're connected. But the other thing I think that's important, and here I'll do my poli-sci theory stuff again. If you see that the debate in Canada on the issue that Ian was just mentioning is related to a debate in the Middle East, and you understand the debate in the Middle East in a particular way, you could develop a system, as it were, to deal with it that represents a situation that's quite different from the situation in the Middle East, because we have citizens in Canada of Israeli and or Israeli supporting background, and citizens of Lebanese and or Lebanese supporting background, and or the other combatants. I'm not going to mention them all, the Palestinians, etc., Gaza, and whatever. And if we see that this can be done in a different way from the way in which it's being done in the Middle East, for reasons that we could discuss, why it's being done that way. It's war. It's not. It's not politics. It's gone beyond politics to war. Then I think it's possible to find a solution, particularly if you see what's behind the movements in the Middle East and in the world in general at the moment. And here's the political theory. I think that with loss of belief in the ideological systems, including, to some extent, liberal democracy, social democracy, Zionism, Palestinian/Arab nationalism, etc. There's a certain loss of belief in these things. One tends to get into revitalization movements. Now, this is a term that I learned from Henry Patterson, who was an Irish, probably still is if he's still alive, an Irish political theorist, talking about the origins of the Irish Republican Army and looking at it very in a long historical context, and showing why something which was supposed to bring peace and new life to Ireland brought violence. And we all know about the troubles in Ireland, or perhaps we don't all, but I certainly do, because I'm of Irish background. And the thing is, if we see what some of the things we see in the world now, including in our neighbor to the south, make America great again. Now, that's a revitalization movement. Revitalization movements tend, says Patterson, to go to extremes. They start with a literary movement, they move to a political movement, and they become a military movement. If we can see that that's what's happening in the Middle East at the moment, then we can distance ourselves from that because we don't have to replicate that here, because we have methods within our system that we've now been discussing that our citizens who are concerned about those things can discuss, can make laws about, and can actually address rather than just ignoring them, which is what a lot of people do. Oh, that's nothing to do with me because I'm not any of those groups. And no, but many of the citizens of this country do belong to those groups. So when you see the demonstrations, as I do every week, when I go to Shepherd and Bathurst area, I see the two sides waving their flags at one another and all kinds of cops in the neighborhood. It can move from that to something else here. In other words, it can be brought forward here. It does, and it may even help the situation back in the Middle East if it can be seen to be helped here. So I'm bringing in the political theory to sort of say, well, here's how we can get beyond it just being a fight between people. It's a fight between ideas. And these are ideas that are being deeply, deeply challenged by the people who follow them in their home countries. They're having trouble there. So what do you expect here? It just spills over. I'm not sure if that's helpful, but that's my comment.
Thanks, Terry. We have 3 questions in the chat. Maybe I'll just read it, or whoever raised the question, maybe you can unmute yourself. If you don't, I will just read it for you. Okay, so first question from HY. I don't know who this person is, but I'll just read the question. In Canada, how are cheating and bribery in the election of the Prime Minister by citizens ultimately discovered? What are the minimum and maximum penalties, respectively? 100% implementation of these punishments? Is that 100% implementation of these punishments?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So who would you go to if you wanted to raise this question as a citizen? And that's where you'd start. You go to your member of parliament. Would you?
I guess so. I think
if that was a question, if you believed that there was cheating by the Prime Minister, just supposing at the moment was cheating by the Prime Minister, I would go to my member of parliament if I thought so and say, I think the Prime Minister's cheating. Do you think that would be helpful? Or what else could I do other than going to my member of parliament? Well, I go to the opposition because in the opposition in the parliamentary system is His Majesty's official opposition. And that means that the leader of the opposition and his party are supposed to pursue these matters. So I wouldn't go if my member of parliament was the same party as the government party first. I would go to the opposition first if I thought there was really a basis for this, so that it could be raised in Parliament. Can you think of any reason why I might not want to do that? If I'm not a member or a supporter of the opposition party, well, there's another party. There's a third party. They don't have many members at the moment. But I could go to that party if I supported that party, although they don't represent me, for example. I could still go to the party, the federal party. I could go to Avi Lewis, who is the current head of the NDP, and why it might be a good idea to go to Avi Lewis, because Avi Lewis is trying to rebuild the NDP, and he's of the Lewis family, and the modern NDP has been largely dominated by the Lewis family after Tommy Douglas. So there was Stephen Lewis, Avi's father, and then Stephen's father, David. And David was an Oxford-educated philosopher, I suppose you could say, political philosopher. So I could go to the NDP and I could say, yeah, Avi Lewis, here's something for you, because he's in the same tradition as his father and his grandfather. He doesn't have ideas to change what they were doing, and they always understood themselves as this, and the public did, as a sort of conscience of Canada. So, in other words, knowing a bit about the history of the parties in Canada might indicate to you who would be most likely to want to go after this. And he'd go after it like a shot because the whole family is in that tradition. And if those of you who've been here long enough, you may remember Ed Broadbent, who was the leader of the NDP at one point. And Ed Broadbent was a very well-educated, a PhD educated economist following the ideas of John Stuart Mill. And our current Prime Minister is an economist, as you know, who was the head of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. And so this might be the NDP, some of the people in the NDP following Ed Broadbent's lead today still might be very interested in pursuing it. There's a guy, I hear him on the radio sometimes, who is very, very interested in this kind of stuff. So I would do a bit of research and find out who would be most likely to pursue this matter. Now, supposing the parties don't want to pursue it, where else could you go? Is there anywhere else? If you don't want to actually get into the parliamentary situation yourself, is there anyone else you could raise this with? In other words, is there anybody that watches the ethics of parliamentarians? Ombudsman, right? What else is there?
It's not an easy question, right?
Well, there's a number of things you could do. What I'm basically saying is, depending on who you are, in terms of what your own views and contacts and beliefs are, you could probably find someone who would be very interested in pursuing this matter, not just for political reasons to get advantage, but actually for principled reasons, because this is a very serious thing. I mean, you might even have a royal commission on this or something, where trying to find out how this terrible corruption occurred and whatever the corruption might be. So, in fact, there's a lot of things you could do. That's sort of what my answer is, I hope, saying. It's not just, you don't have to sit around and wait for someone to do something. There's a lot you can do right away if you think this is really true, and your motive for doing it is not just to embarrass the government, but you really think there's real substance to this and it needs to be pursued so that the corruption is exposed and the offender is prosecuted.
So you go to maybe a newspaper?
That's another possibility. So if you wanted to go to a newspaper and you wanted to embarrass the current government, which one would you go to?
The opposite, like the
National
political attitude is the
You
opposite.
go to the National Post because of its contact, its connections with the Liberal Party. If you read the National Post in comparison to the Globe and Mail, in comparison to the Toronto Star on any one day, you will see that they are following different lines about what the government is doing. One will be opposed, one will be largely supportive, with a certain amount of opposition, and another one will be indifferent because it doesn't care. But the thing is that you'll get different. So you need to know a little bit about, if you're going that route, you need to know a little bit about the press. Now, I can't tell you anything about the internet because I'm not from that generation. I'm ancient and have no insight into that whatsoever.
Or maybe can you go to the court?
Well, but the reason I'm saying what I said is because you have to have a preliminary to get there. In other words, and I don't know how you would know that the prime minister is corrupt, apart from something somebody has told you. But you would be wanting to build a case. Now, you don't have to build the case because you're not the lawyer that's building the case, but you would need to have support for a case to go forward before the courts. And so it needs to become public at the right time. So I would probably think that having some advice, some sort of professional advice about how to go about this so that you're not blowing the story too early, as it were, but you're bringing it to the point where it can become a public issue that will be definitely discussed. And it can be solved, if this is part of your question, with the removal of the prime minister for corruption. That can certainly happen.
When should the legal system like step forward to build the case?
I agree with you, but what I'm saying to you is that at the beginning of it, you need to, as in anything else, speak to people who know what they're doing in such a situation, first of all, and secondly, who have a motive for doing it. And it's not just a personal motive that they don't happen to like the prime minister or something. It would need to be something that would help you to substantiate what you're saying. Because again, going back to the common sense question, that should never be eclipsed. You should always do it sensibly, step by step. Don't take jumps before you've got to that point. You see what I mean? And I'm again, this is me being a political theorist and saying, which has something to do with ethics. Our system is based on common sense. That doesn't mean commonly accepted opinions. That means right reason, something that's recognized in all of the important Western traditions. So you have to do it that way rather than just making accusations and that kind of stuff. Because, Stephen and I were talking earlier today about the lady who claimed to be Queen of Canada and wasn't the Queen of anything other than herself. You remember the lady from the Queen of Canada?
Yeah.
In other words, it just becomes buffoonery at that point, and eventually the lady gets prosecuted for being a crackpot and causing trouble, people losing their homes and different things. So you have to make sure that everything is being done properly, step by step. So I would have someone, have someone as a consultant who really knows how to do such a thing.
I think that the listener gave the example like as a prime minister, but I think all this apply to any political figures,
Right.
the opposition party, whichever, right? In
Absolutely.
the government, if you find corruption.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
But that works right down through the system, in my opinion. And I haven't just sort of studied it or talked about it. I was active, not as a candidate, in politics at one time, years and years and years ago. And then I went to university about it afterwards as a mature student. But I was already practicing, but it was municipal politics. But you have to do it at that level, sure. But it works all the way up, right up to the top.
Mm-hmm.
You have to cross your T's and dot your I's all the way.
And Jane, I think there are other questions.
Yeah, there are quite some questions left. And also Ian has raised his hand. So Ian, do you have any comments on the current question?
Yeah, I just wanted to let everybody know there's, I just did a quick Google search. There is an official ethics commissioner, which is an independent agent of the Canadian government. And part of their mandate seems to be, I'd have to dig into it a little deeper, but part of their mandate seems to be that if someone in government is suspected of an ethics violation, so if they have engaged in a conflict of interest relative to their duties as an officer of the government, the ethics commissioner can investigate and see if an actual conflict of interest has occurred and take the necessary legal steps through the attorney general to take whatever action needs to be taken in that context.
Thank you. That's, I'm sure, correct. Yeah.
Thank
The
you.
reason I suggested what I suggested is because from my own experience, it's important not to be just an individual saying something. Because people in any political party that you spoke to about this would have some obvious interest, perhaps, if it wasn't the Liberal Party itself, but they would be very, very careful because otherwise they would be in deep doo-doo, as it were. And so they would make sure that you would do the sort of thing that Ian did, which is to check what's the first step, in other words, you would do all of that work very, very carefully. However, we do live in a party system. And as I've tried to explain before, I think in someone else's question, the reason we have parties, because I actually had a professor who suggested, he wrote a book called Myth of Parliament and wanted to get rid of the party system. But I never bought the argument because I knew that the history of the party system was a history of gangs. Would you prefer to have parties that talk to one another or gangs? I prefer to have parties. In other words, human nature being what it is, and there'll be some debate about what it is, you're not going to get sensible, civilized, commonsensical approaches to things unless you really go through the steps of doing that. You tend to get gangs. In other words, people are defensive emotionally, and they defend their stuff, their interests. And our whole system is designed so that it doesn't just fall into that. And
that's an important point. The
parliamentary
idea of leveling an accusation at a political figure, you have to have some pretty solid proof
right.
for whatever it is that you're accusing them of. Otherwise, it's just mudslinging, and
Right.
that's not healthy for any system.
And since we had TV which is late in my time in Parliament, you get a lot of mudslinging, which is basically irrelevant because the real work is taking place in the committees, not
It's political theater.
It's theater. It's theater. Exactly. However, if you realize that there is a certain element of the theatrical in politics, there's a bit of acting involved. So don't ignore the politics, as would be my advice to you. Even write it right away. But now that we know about about who you should really go to first in terms of having authority, but I would probably, if you talk to Avi Lewis about this, he'd probably say the same sort of thing to you. But he'd be very interested because he would be helping you to bring this to the public and to do something about it and all this kind of stuff. So you can use the political system without it damaging you. And I encourage that.
Thanks, Terry. And next question is from Lydia Chen. Is hate speech only referred to speech made by English or French in Canada?
Shit. Well, I guess I don't know. That's a real. You have to bring that up with the Senate, where the bill is now. That's a good question. I hadn't thought about that one.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think that's part of the debate right now.
It's part of the debate. Yeah. See, one of the issues was should the new the strengthened hate speech law, be strong enough to be able to seize holy books, either the Bible or the Quran or whatever it is, the Mahabharata, that have passages in them that seem to be hate speech. And one of the spokespeople seemed to think that that should be an idea, and quite a number, as you might imagine, from religious communities thought this is not a good idea. Well, when I first heard about this, my initial response, as Stephen knows, was, well, in first year political theory, which was conducted by a Marxist professor, a Marxist philosopher in a Canadian university, very, very good teacher and all this kind of stuff. One of the things everybody read, they had to read, was Mein Kampf. Hitler's book. And why? Because he wanted to make people into Nazis? Of course not. Because he wanted to actually tell them, well, this is what the man said. We can't study political theory without reading what the people said. And we can't just dismiss things and, oh, that's Nazi or something. Well, what does that mean? And this is proper education. So if you want to say there's all kinds of stuff that shouldn't be there in the Bible or the Quran or whatever it is, what do? Just ban the books? Burn the books? That's what the Nazis did, burn books. So no, it couldn't possibly or shouldn't possibly mean that by the time that law is finally passed. That's not common sense.
This is part of the balancing that legislators go through, is trying to decide how broad or how narrow the impact of the legislation is going to be.
Yes.
Will it capture things that they don't intend to capture and that are actually not harmful?
Right.
Or does it miss things because it's too narrowly defined?
Yes.
And not capture things that ought to be captured because they are detrimental to Canadian society. It's a really difficult balancing act, and it's something that even when legislation is put through the House and approved by the Senate and receives royal assent, can be challenged if the law that is enacted is either too narrow or too broad.
Yes.
And if harms can be demonstrated because of the enactment of that law can be struck down by the Supreme Court.
Oh, yes.
And sent back to the legislation for redrafting because it is either too narrow or too broad to get the balance right. This is something that legislators agonize over endlessly.
Yes. And they should. They should.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's exactly what they should be doing.
Yeah. And this is where a lot of the debate in legislation comes from, is arguing over exactly this. It's how broad do you make it? How narrow do you make it? How tightly defined are your terms? Are there loopholes? Are there gaps that need to be addressed? And in a lot of ways, the committee process is supposed to hammer out a lot of this detail, but then it goes to the House and it goes to a vote, and the people in the House have to understand what's being proposed and its potential impact. And then it goes to the Senate, where it has to be reflected on, as Terry says, as a sort of sober second thought, and to think about the implications of that legislation as it's proposed, and perhaps make amendments to it and send it back to the House for those amendments to be revisited. So it's an iterative process that gets you finally to a piece of legislation that hopefully strikes the right balance. That's the whole idea.
Right. Right.
We have a bunch of comments or questions from H.
Things always heat up when we're out of time.
Yeah, but we kind of running out of time. It's 9:31. Yang, when is like
We way over time, but can you quickly read the comments and questions there?
Yeah,
Or-
there are quite I think it in Canada, any promises made by the elected prime minister to the voters before the election cannot be fulfilled after the election. How can Canada deal with these chaos as quickly and optimally as possible at present? If not, will there definitely be a fundamental mistake in the future to deal with these chaotic situations in the fastest and best way? What exactly is the fundamental cause? How can this measurement be rolled out as quickly as a few years from now? What exactly is the fundamental cause? Okay, let me read all of them before you. There's too many questions. I guess it just give you some kind of feelings and everything, and you might, because you cannot. I believe each one of them might be too much to discuss. In Canada, how can a new party be established as quickly as possible and become the largest ruling party? Under what condition can foreign immigrants, after becoming Canadian citizens, always be able to establish a new party the fastest? How exactly is it built? I mean, in Canada, how exactly do citizens establish institutions to investigate cheating and bribery in the election of the prime minister? It is useful with the interference of officials, financial groups, and judges. Can an investigation still be conducted in the end? Is there the fairest survey result? What is the fundamental cause? Is everything going on at the committee not broadcast live on TV? What is the fundamental cause? Ultimately, what are the fundamental cause and so evidence of anti-Marxism in Canada? Also, there's arbitrary legislation in Canada. How can it be resolved as quickly and optimally as possible? Ultimately, is there a way to solve it? What exactly is the fundamental cause? Is the final analysis in the final analysis who's making the legislation in Canada? What exactly is the fundamental cause? So I guess this is quite overwhelmingly a lot of questions. And I think I embedded a lot of, I think, emotional insight as well. I think a lot of, I feel a disappointment. I can feel like in
I hope
like lack of trust in the
yes, and I
government
hope
and
that's
everything.
not cynicism,
Mm,
because although cynicism in the Greek world was fine, it didn't mean quite what it means now. But cynicism, as it's come to mean, I don't think, and I'm not suggesting the question shouldn't be answered, but cynicism isn't going to help. Not just with the political system, but with anything. It's more or less a useless philosophy. I don't mean the ancient cynics and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about in the modern context. What cynicism has come to mean is I give up. And as somebody said to me in a book they sent me recently, an old friend of mine, the book was titled "The Future Deserves a Nervous Breakdown." That's not going to help. This was a book of poetry that the person had written. So the point is, I don't think the future deserves a nervous breakdown to counter what the book says as its title. I think it deserves right reason, common sense, reflection, listening to history and listening to right reason, and having a sensible view of human nature, which is not unbalanced in one direction or another. I am the center of the universe, the sort of narcissistic personality type, which one gets sometimes, or I mean nothing. Obviously, that isn't true. You mean something to someone in some context, and you're not the center of the universe. So those are kind of points of view which one could have, but are not going to help. Anyway, I've said enough.
I think
But
that's probably the
questions are good.
purpose of we
Questions are
taking this course, right?
Yeah.
To know how exactly we can approach and do something to
Something
make
can be
this
done.
country better.
That's my key point. Something can be done. It's not hopeless.
I think that's why we're trying our best, right? To do the lecture series, to have this discussion. Yeah.
So can we keep those questions and run with them in the future? Because I understand there's a break coming in the series, and then it comes back after the summer. So maybe that might be something for us to think about.
I think we probably need some additional sessions to have more deeper discussions.
I think so, yes. But it's a great start. Thank you very much for your
Thank you. Thank you all. It's a very interesting discussion.
Yes, I think
we'll need to do we need to do the quiz in English
Quiz,
and do the lucky draw.
Okay, so let me just start an English quiz. Okay, start it. Let's give it 3 minutes. 3 minutes.
Can you read the questions for us?
Sure. The first question: as a constitutional document, the charter is part of the supreme law of the land. This means that other statutes must accord with its principles. If a court find that any law violates one of the rights or freedoms listed in the Charter, it may strike down part or all of the law and direct the government to change or repeal it. Is this statement true or false? This is the first question.
Mhm.
Okay. The second question, please identify if the following statement is true. Everyone has the right to life or liberty and security of the person. Therefore, the right cannot be deprived in any situation. And the third question is, Federal Bill C-1, also known as the Combating Hate Act, is a highly debated piece of legislation introduced to amend the criminal code recently. It seeks to create a standalone hate crime offense, ban public displays of hate symbols, such as those tied to terrorist groups or Nazism. The criminalize the intimidation or obstruction of people accessing religious or cultural spaces. However, it has been controversial for some critics. What are the possible concerns that are related to Canadian rights and freedoms among the critics? A, freedom of religions. B, freedom of expressions. C, neither A or nor B. D is both A and B. And the fourth question, during World War I, Canada joined the war against Germany independently. Is this statement true or false? The fifth one, oh, this is a long question. Cowling was the first hired on contract as a provincial labor relations officer in 1999 when she was 59 years old. Her contract was renewed every 2 to 3 years, and she's received positive performance reviews and bonus every year for 8 years. Just before her final contract ended in 2007, Cowling was told that her department was restructuring and her position was being downgraded. It would become a permanent growth or development position. When Cowling applied for the new position, she found that the responsibilities were virtually identical to her former position. However, she wasn't hired. The new position was never filled, and the job description was then upgraded. Cowling filed a complaint with the Alberta Human Rights Commission. Which rights of the Cowling were infringed by the employer? A, democratic rights. B, mobility rights. C, legal rights. D, equality rights. Okay, that's the end of the questions.
Thank you very much, Jen.
Okay, let me end the poll. It's already 4 minutes past.
Okay.
Hope you submitted okay.
And Stephen, could you please, while Jen will do the
I
lucky
think
draw.
we don't need a draw today
Oh.
because both quiz we have only probably
Two.
one submitted
Okay.
question answer.
Yeah. So we need you to do the quiz to go into this lucky draw. Yeah. Okay. So then Stephen, could you please give us the correct answers?
Yes, okay. Yeah, the first one, yeah, the answer is right. The statement is true because the Constitution, the Canadian's Charter of Rights and Freedoms is the highest authority in Canada. So two, the answer is wrong because even though Canadian citizens have the right to life, liberty, and security, but you cannot go against the fundamental justice of the society. Yeah, otherwise, you're not going to have the rights. Number three, that's the case we were discussing, right, in the group discussion session. So the possible concerns related to Canadian rights and freedoms are freedom, religions, and expressions. And of course, there are some other concerns as well. Let's say the ambiguity of the meaning of hate speeches, right? But what is relevant to this lecture, it's to do with the freedom of religious and freedom of expressions. Yeah, so the answer is D. Yeah, both A and B. So four, during World War I, Canada joined the war against Germany independently. Is this statement true or false? Yeah, the answer is false because, as we discussed in the lecture, only when Canada came to the Second World War II, Second World War, Canada joined the war independently. During the First World War, Canada was still hugely under the control of the British Empire. So they were going to the war automatically once the war broke out. Yeah. Number five, this is a case study, a long story, but the idea is to say if you can tell which rights that are relevant to the discussion we had today. So obviously it's to do with the equity rights. Yeah, so it has nothing to do with the democratic rights, Anna. Yeah, so the answer is let me see. Yeah, so the equity rights. Yeah, so basically the employer infringed the rights of being hired uh, like she she was filing the complaint based on the ground that like she was supposed to be treated equally with any other people. Yeah, so let me see. I cannot see the answer, bro. Yeah, so that's to do with the equity rights. Yeah.
It's Judy's. Yes,
Judy's.
Judy's the only person who submitted.
Okay,
So-
Julius, last month you also won a voucher. So I'm gonna bring both to you on Wednesday. Okay.
Okay.
Never
So, yeah.
mind. I can pass the first. I can pass one up. You can keep it.
It's not fair. You have this
Listen, dear, I've
equity
been listening.
right.
All you very intelligent people. It's wonderful. It's like taking a course in university, listening to everybody. I think, my gosh, there's so much to learn, and I really appreciate. And I'm, Canadian, studied, and all the rest. And so people who are immigrants who are trying to learn all this stuff, I give them credit because, my God, most of us don't really understand any of it. So,
And Terry and Ian, they're just
yeah.
wonderful.
You're very, very good communicators. So it's great.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all. Yeah, let's so we'll have next session will be in September, the first Monday in September. Yeah, and Terry and Ian I'm now very much looking forward to our party in December. Then we can all meet, in person, talk,
Yes, thank you. Look forward to that. Yeah.
And maybe in July 11th, if you guys interested, we can go to Arthur's farm
Indeed.
and we can
Thank you
have a
very much.
meeting there. Thank you.
Love
Thank you,
to.
everyone, and thank you, Jen, Stephen.
Yes.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
For inquiries, please contact info@eawlc.org or visit our website at www.eawlc.org.